why do you Catholics impose celibacy on your priests, right? I mean, what's the point? Especially in our day and time, when a shortage of vocations to the priesthood, doesn't it just make good demographical, practical, numerical sense to just open up the Latin Rite priesthood to married men? And where's the biblical basis for this Catholic practice of a celibate priesthood? Even a number of Catholic theologians, and they would probably answer you no, that it doesn't, that it is something that we Catholics practice out of reverence for tradition, but it's not necessarily scriptural. And so in this hour, I'm gonna slightly beg to differ. But let's go even further, because there's a third piece of evidence, and that's the story of the cleansing of the temple. So, y'all know the story, but let's look at it again. Again, I want you to watch the Old Testament text Jesus cites, because they're like bombs that he sets off in the faces of his opponents. The context of that passage Jesus quotes in the face of the chief priests and scribes is Isaiah's famous prophecy of a new temple and a new priesthood. Does it surprise you that they killed him? No, because they knew the Old Testament. All right? So then, again, our third text, Jesus here is talking about a future age in which Gentiles, get this, Gentiles and childless men will serve as priests. Well, you may say, okay, I can see that, but could you give me something even a little more explicit? No, I'll say, yes, I can. Maybe you were reading Matthew devotionally, and you come across this text. But once Jesus finishes prohibiting remarriage after divorce, guess what the apostles say? If such is the case with a man and his wife, it's better not even to get married. In other words, look, Jesus, that's nice, but if I can't get out of this situation, maybe I shouldn't even get into it to begin with, right? But he said to them, not all men can receive this precept, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to accept this, let him accept it. It's a fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. Why didn't Jesus just say there are some who become virgins for the kingdom of heaven, or who remain virgins for the kingdom of heaven? Why did he say eunuchs? Because he knows Isaiah 56. And he is talking to his apostles, and he's calling them to the vision of a celibate priesthood that Isaiah had prophesied in the Old Testament. So he takes the imagery of Isaiah and unites it to the kingdom of heaven. And he says, he who can accept this, let him accept it. The question you want to be asking me at this point is, all right, Dr. Pitre, that sounds really good. Nice quotes from Isaiah. But weren't the apostles married? If you think about the New Testament, and I know most of you probably have it memorized, so let's just run through it in your head, right? Where are all the wives of the apostles, right? Yeah, you see them a lot, don't you? Mrs. Andrew, Mrs. Thomas, Mrs. James, Mrs. John, Mrs. Judas. She was a real nice lady, right? The only time you hear is the famous story of Simon Peter's mother-in-law, right? Now let's look at that for a minute, because clearly in Mark chapter 1, this describes the story of Simon and his mother-in-law. This is irrefutable evidence that Peter was married, right? We can assume with good reason that Peter was married at some point. But notice, where's his wife? Where is she in the story? I mean, it's his house, right? The mother-in-law is sick. They need somebody to serve them a meal. So Jesus is forced to heal the mother-in-law so that they can have a meal. Where's his wife? But there's another text, too, that you might say, oh, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yes, Dr. Pitre, what about 1 Corinthians 9:5? Is that what you were thinking? Yes, that's right. Okay. Doesn't Paul say something about his right to travel with his wife? And doesn't he say, when he says that Peter would travel around with his wife? This is the irony. I think the very text that people use to say the apostles didn't practice celibacy is the very text that actually shows that they did, right? But that's how biblical scholarship works. All right. Turn the page. John in Revelation has a vision of the 144,000. So who are these men who are sexually abstinent virgins? 144,000 who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They are the priests of the new covenant, who have given their lives for the sake of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Wherever you see the Lamb of God made flesh in the Holy Eucharist, who is there? The priest. Wherever you hear the new song of the new covenant being sung that only they can sing, who is there? The priest. Whenever you see a man who has been set apart not just for the Father but for Christ, for the Lamb, consecrated to Christ, who is it? The priest. This is John's vision, not of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but of the new covenant priesthood. And one of its characteristic marks is the gift of celibacy. The gift of oneself, the consecration of one's whole body to the mission of the Eucharist and the mission of the church.